Lamb is the light, and the night is as fair as the day. There will be peace in the valley for me someday. There will be peace in the valley for me, oh Lord, I pray. There'll be no sadness, no sorrow, no trouble I see. There will be peace in the valley for me. Well, the flowers will be blooming.
Really having a late start. You just didn't hear Steve and my conversation. We were already having Sunday school class. I'm sorry about that, but about something else. Okay, so the lesson sheet from last week's what we at. We are talking about the methods of evangelism, the methods of Christ, and the way He would reach people. And we're on B on Sunday school lesson 20. We're going to go to Luke chapter 5. Hope you all had a good week. The beautiful weather, isn't it? Gorgeous weather. I had a surprise this morning of a friend of ours. Actually, this couple I married them years ago, and she was in my youth group. I was a youth pastor, and she and her husband, after the wedding, they moved to Montana and have started several churches in Montana. And he sent me a text this morning, said, I'm going to be popping through Sunday evening. Tonight I'm in Indianapolis for a meeting, so I'm going to get to see them tonight. I haven't seen them in, 100 years. I'm kind of excited about that. They've been I think he started 2 or 3 churches out there in Montana. Small churches is a different kind of a thing, because miles and miles, they travel an hour to get to different places. But yeah, he's raised kids, and one of his sons is in music and doing some. I'm pretty excited about that. So I just had to share that with you. Hopefully they'll be here tonight. If you come back tonight, you'll get to meet them. Luke chapter 5, verse 17. It came to pass on a certain day, as he was teaching, there were Pharisees and doctors of the law sitting by, which were come out of every town of Galilee and Judea and Jerusalem, and the power of the Lord was present to heal them. Behold, men brought in a bed a man which was taken with a palsy, and they sought means to bring him in and to lay him before him. And when they could not find by what way they might bring him in because of the multitude, they went upon the housetop and let him down through the tiling with his couch into the midst before Jesus. And when he saw their faith, he said unto them, Man, thy sins are forgiven thee. And the scribes and the Pharisees began to reason, saying, Who is this which speaketh blasphemies? Who can forgive sins but God alone? When Jesus perceived their thoughts, he answering said unto them, What reason ye in your hearts? Whether it is easier to say, Thy sins be forgiven thee, or to say, Rise up and walk? But that ye may know that the Son of Man hath power upon earth to forgive sins, he saith unto the sick of the palsy, I say unto thee, Arise and take up thy couch and go to thine house. And immediately he rose up before them, took up that whereon he lay, and departed to his own house, glorifying God. And they were all amazed. They glorified God and were filled with fear, saying, We've seen strange things today. So what I want to point out here in this story is that Jesus always went to the heart of the problem. It was a dramatic event. The crowd was thick. No one could pass through. Roof was torn up. You're standing in the middle of the house, and all of a sudden, the roof is opened up, and somebody comes through the roof. I mean, that's pretty dramatic. Obviously needed to be healed, and Jesus looks at this man who everyone was expecting him to heal, to show us something. And the first thing he says has nothing to do with him being sick of the palsy. First thing he says is, your sins are forgiven you. First thing. Think about that. He goes right past what everyone would consider to be the obvious. you have to admit the crowd was not expecting this kind of approach. They had almost become familiar with Jesus healing people. Here they were watching to see what would happen. Instead of healing the man, Jesus forgives the sins. The healing after this, of course, was amazing. And I'm going to say to you, when you're witnessing to people, think about this. Think about, let's go to the heart of the problem. If we're going to help somebody, we've got to bypass sometimes the obvious and go to what's really causing the problem. Okay? So, let me give you an example. I've had people come to me and say, "Preacher, I need to get things right with the Lord. I'm still a smoker, and I need to stop smoking. I know smoking is a sin." If you're trying to win them to Christ, do we stop and deal with smoking? I can't even tell you that smoking is a sin. In fact, the only verse I can give you in the Bible that would be against smoking is you can't take fire into your bosom without being burned. That's in the book of Proverbs. And when you smoke, you burn you burn your lungs. Okay? So the idea that if you smoke, you're going to hell, it's not going to send you to hell. It'll make you smell like you've been there. But it's not going to send you to hell. But some people think that, wow, if I'm a smoker, then I can't do anything for God. Well, what's funny is Charles Haddon Spurgeon smoked cigars, and he quit smoking cigars when he was walking down the street, and he saw in this tobacco place a sign says, "Smoke cigars like the great divine Charles Spurgeon." He said, "I don't want to be known for the cigars I smoke. I want to be known for the gospel I preach." And so right then he quit smoking cigars. I'm done with it because I'm communicating the wrong message. And that's kind of the way we are as Christians. We find things that we do. Probably there's things that you do that you never thought of as being bad. You just did it because you just did it. You've always done it. And as the Lord shows us things, we try to trim those things off, right? But to be a better Christian, a better person, more wholesome person. But my point is simply this. If you spend a whole lot of time talking about, you just bypass that when you're talking about, that doesn't even matter. Go to the heart of the problem, right? If we're going to talk about the whole transgender problem. Okay, so you can get so far into the weeds, and this is a serious issue in our culture. It's so serious because our schools are teaching the kids this stuff. Kids are beginning to think that, oh, transgenderism is just a normal thing because that's what's getting pounded in their heads. So here's the thing. Someone comes in and they have purple hair on this side, pink hair on this side, tattoos all over their face, studs through their nose, through their ears, through everything that's hanging, anything at all, studs everywhere. I remember one guy, they used to call him Tackle Box. He had like 7 safety pins in his cheek, and I mean, it was like, literally, it looks like he fell face first into a tackle box and came up and it all stuck. It was bad, but he accepted the Lord. I mean, he had holes through, it was unbelievable. Zach probably remember tackle box up here in Michigan. That's what they call them. But anyway, you look at that and realize that that is not the problem. Reached a fellow one time who was covered in tattoos, and he was a press man. He became a printer for our print shop that we had in Indiana. Little guy, never forget, rough, oh my goodness. And he said, "You know, preacher," he said, "my addiction," he said, "I don't have trouble with drugs, and I don't have trouble with alcohol, I don't have trouble with that." He said, "My addiction is tattoos." He said, "I just always want another tattoo." I was, well, that's kind of obvious. You know, you got, your body's a canvas, obviously. And, but you see, I could stand there and I could look at that and can't look past the tattoos. Well, wait. Let's bypass. There are cultures that's the way it is. People are that way. You have to look past what maybe seem to be obvious and realize there's a root, there's something else going on. Why does someone feel like they have to tattoo their face? Why? So you look at them and you say, oh, no, go past the obvious. Go to the heart. What's motivating them to do that? I was talking to this guy. The insurance guy came in to see me one time. And he was, in his 40s, and he had a diamond stud in his ear. And I was just, as we were talking about insurance. Suddenly he tells me he's a preacher's kid. And his dad was a Baptist preacher, and he was, so I just asked him, I said, well, why did you pierce your ear? You grew up different. You grew up the way I did. Why did you put a diamond stud in your ear? And he starts crying. I'm like, I don't know what to do with that. As a grown man, starts crying in my office. And he said, my dad, I was trying to get a rise out of my dad. And he said, he's never said a word to me about it. So you see what I'm saying? The diamond stud in his ear isn't the problem. Are you with me? Well, that wasn't the issue, and we can get Dale. You were raised in this kind of preaching a lot of time. We can get fussy about some of that stuff, can't we? And we can get fussy about, well, you're doing this and you don't look like a Christian, or you don't look like a fundamentalist, or you don't look. Let's get past the obvious and go to the why. Right? Does that make sense? Are you with me so far? When you're trying to reach someone, understand that there's a motivation behind everything they do. What is that motivation? What's the brokenness in the heart? What's going on there? And you'll be surprised. So, guy comes in wearing black leather and chains, and he's got hair down the middle of his back. And your first reaction is, okay, go out and see in the parking lot, he's probably riding a motorcycle. And, well, this is a guy that's probably rough. And you might find out that this guy is one of the gentlest souls that you've ever met in your life. He's very gentle, very kind-hearted, probably, goes to shop with a cop and gives money to kids, and probably puts more money into McDonald's, Ronald McDonald House than you do, Go past the obvious. Why is he doing that? What's going on in his heart? Are you guys with me so far? Jesus did that. He did that always. He just bypassed what everybody expected him to say and went right to the heart. I have a friend who comes periodically who he has a ponytail. He and I have never once discussed it. Never once. He grew up in a Christian home. I've met his father, and he's come visited church a few times. We've never, ever talked about it. Why? Because that's really not the problem. You guys with me? The problem is behind that, underneath that. So look for that. Look for that. When you're witnessing to somebody, they'll be completely shocked because they're presenting something to you because they want you to see that. They don't want you to go past that. All right? Teenagers that way. They're presenting a certain thing. We see this in school all the time. They're presenting a certain persona. There's something behind that. That you know, it's pretty fascinating to find. Okay, so the third thing we're going to talk about here is C. In Luke chapter 5, verse 27, he said, after these things he went forth and saw a publican named Levi sitting at the receipt of custom. He said to him, follow me. And he left all, rose up and followed him. And Levi made him a great feast in his own house, and there was a great company of publicans and of others that sat down with him. But their scribes and Pharisees murmured against his disciples, saying, why do you eat and drink with publicans and sinners? And Jesus answered, said, they that are whole need not a physician, but they that are sick. Look at this. You'll never get anywhere with a person if you talk down to them. This is similar to addressing the heart of the problem, in that Jesus, you'll see, was never too good to sit down with the lowest of the crowd and eat with them. Never, ever. Look at Luke chapter 7, verse 36. And one of the Pharisees desired him that he would eat with him, and he went to the Pharisee's house and sat down to eat meat. Well, no, I don't know if you guys heard this. A lot of guys talk about this. A lot of churches talk about how Jesus would eat with the publicans and sinners. And I don't hear anybody preaching about, well, you know, Jesus would go and eat with the Pharisees? You know, that's also in there. He ate with a religious crowd that were fakes as much as he ate with the publicans and sinners. You know, so the current culture wants to tell us, the Christians, they want to tell us that we should go out to the highways and byways, and we should go to the bars, and we should sit down with all the bad people. We should also sit down with the fake religious people. Even the people that seem to have it all put together. See, Jesus sat with everyone. Paul said in 1 Corinthians chapter, is it 9? Look back there real quick. He said, I became all things. Yes. Verse 19 of 1 Corinthians 9. For though I be free from all men, yet have I made myself servant unto all, that I might gain the more. And to the Jews I became as a Jew, that I might gain the Jews. To them that are under the law, as under the law, that I might gain them that are under the law. To them that are without law, as without law, being not without law to God, but under the law to Christ, that I might gain them that are without law. Verse 22, to the weak became I as weak, that I might gain the weak. I made all things to all men, that I might by all means save some. See, what's he talking about here? He said, I can function in any circle, whether it's a religious circle or a non-religious circle. Why? Because, let me just put it this way. You need to be comfortable in your own skin. You need to know who you are and what you believe. One of the biggest problems I think we have in Christendom is that people that aren't really sure of what they believe, they're nervous about talking with someone that disagrees with them. If you know what you believe, you can learn from anyone, and you can be in any circle and it not affect you. So let me back up and see if I can illustrate this point. Back in the early 1900s, as a fallout from what Dr. Westcott and Hort did with the Bible translations, 1881, as a fallout, a lot of the religious colleges and universities and so on began to embrace Darwinian theology and Westcott and Hort textual criticism. And they started blending evolution with creation, calling it theistic evolution. How many of you ever heard of the term theistic evolution? Okay, theistic evolution is basically saying that evolution is a real thing, that man did come from frogs, but God made the frog. Basically, that I mean, that's oversimplified, fine, but that's basically the idea. That God started it all, then he walked away and let man evolve into what he's become. They call that theistic evolution. they started embracing this idea that we didn't actually have the Word of God completely, 100%. They started embracing the idea that Dr. Westcott and Hort had found the old texts that were more reliable and so on, and they started mixing that in and started learning that the Bible was faulty and miscopied and so on. And this idea pervaded the Southern Baptist colleges. It swept through Harvard. It swept through all of the theological places, and it began to be called modernism. You ever heard that term? Modernism? So basically all the modernists they threw out the King James Bible, early 1900s, and embraced what they called the RV, which was the Revised Version, which was different than the King James Bible and had all these other perversions in it. Groups of preachers, I'm talking Bob Jones Sr., some of you guys have heard that name, some of the early guys like even Torrey and some of those guys, they began to say, look, we've got to find common denominators between our denominations because we need to reach our culture. The Roaring '20s was coming up and it was wild, and the United States was getting crazy, spending money like crazy. The advancements after World War II, for example, the things were happening so fast. I mean, an increase in learning was happening. And a lot of Steve, we were talking about prophecy. That's where a lot of the current prophecy positions were developed, because they were beginning to see how in the Bible it said near the end, there's going to be an increase in learning. And so there was this massive increase. I mean, we're talking radios and televisions and the music began to become this different thing. And for 100 years, there was advancements and inventions like crazy. I mean, the washing machines and all of that was coming, all this stuff coming out of what we call the greatest generation, that gave us all these things that we like, cars and all this stuff, transportation, trains, and anyway. So all these preachers that loved the Bible and believed the Bible said, hey, we are losing ground here. We need to do something about it. Guys like Bob Jones Sr. got into movie producing. I don't know, did you guys know that? I'm talking about back in the 40s and 50s, when movies were becoming a thing, and they started making black and whites, and these preachers would get up and preach, and they would film them, dub the voice in, so you could get a film of a preacher preaching on a movie screen. They were trying to stay current with their culture, trying to reach their culture. Well, these guys realized this problem, and so they began to band together and try to find commonalities, and this is where fundamentalism became a thing, what they call fundamentalism, because these guys said there are fundamentals of the faith that we can agree together to believe. Things like Jesus Christ died to save us, His blood atonement saves us, things like that. The modernists, in the meantime, were taking things like songs with the blood, taking them out of their hymn books. So fundamentalism became this unifying, rallying cry. Everybody, whether they were Methodists or Baptists or Presbyterians or whatever they were, would band together under this title of fundamentalism. Big conferences, the Billy Sunday conferences, the Bob Jones conferences, they started sweeping the country. And even as recent as the early 70s, the Billy Sunday tabernacles across the country were still being used. And we would hear guys like Lester Roloff, Bob Jones Sr., Fight Bob Schuler. These guys were all different denominations. R.G. Lee, Gypsy Smith, these big names were coming together in these big conferences, and they were joining together under this title of fundamentalism. Well, somehow, I don't know how it happened, but in the fundamentalist movement, a change came, and I think the devil was part of it, where we started identifying ourselves not on what we believed, but how we practiced. Are you hearing me? This is what happened. And so fundamentalism shifted from we can unify to you're a modernist, liberal, and I can tell because you have screens in your church. And we started, I'm not going to be seen with those guys. When it got to the 70s, churches like First Baptist Church in Hammond and Jack Hyles, it grew. I think they boast something like 60,000 members at one point in their church. Fastest growing church in America at one point. And churches in Texas, at different places, had these huge, gigantic, I'm sorry, I stepped on my shoe and untied it, and I'm going to trip on it. So they would preach these messages and these conferences, and instead of being, let's find how we believe, let's believe the same, let's find these commonalities, and it became, we're going to fight against the fundamentalists. My dad was involved in an organization called the Independent Fundamental Churches of America, which is IFCA. When he finally came out of it, he said it stood for I Fight Christians Anywhere instead of Independent Fundamental Churches of America. Because these guys would go through their hymn books, and anything that did not match what they thought they wanted to, they would put red X's. So you would open the hymn book. We're fundamentalists because we have red X's in our hymn books over songs that we will not sing because they are not doctrinally correct. And like the Ephesian church in Revelation chapter 2, the fundamentalist churches they lost their love completely. To the point that now we're having trouble. Folks will say, because we're a fundamental Baptist church, folks will say, well, we can't come to your church or your school because we don't dress proper. We don't know your dress code. Have you guys heard me preach about dress code here? We have a school, we have some dress code, we have some loose outside boundaries similar to what the public school does. It's hard to keep them, but because there's always these fads that come through, and some of them it doesn't matter, and some of them we're just trying to keep some kind of. But there's not really a lot of biblical guidelines. There are some biblical guidelines when it comes to dress standards, but there's not a lot, honestly. And so the schools and stuff would have these boundaries, these rules. And someone came to me the other day, one of the parents at our school, they were trying to understand our strict clothing standard guidelines, which is basically if your girls are wearing jeans, wear jeans, don't wear things that expose your legs, like rips, big holes and stuff in them. Don't look like you crawled out from underneath the bridge, basically. But I know those are expensive jeans now, so the girls have figured out how to do that decently. They'll wear pants underneath them. I don't know how that's comfortable, but anyway, so you got these ragged things hanging here, and you got pants underneath them. Well, at least they're decent. But I was like, why do you want to look that? I don't know. It's that style. I was talking to one of the teenage girls about it. She said, well, we like that. I'm like, yes, I understand. But anyway, some of our rules, this mother was saying to me, I don't understand this rule. And what are your church standards? I said, well, if you come to our church, we don't have it. You come through the door, it's like, okay, are you wearing proper attire? You don't do that at our church. No. She said, well, I'm not familiar with the Baptist standards. I'm like, where do you get that? Well, it's because the idea is for some years, the fundamental Baptists have had this, you can't serve anywhere unless you wear these clothes all the time. And it's like, that's not who we are. Come on. What's happened is, I've seen people get turned away from a church because they weren't wearing the proper attire. Wait a second. This is taking it too far. Hello? We're going too far. We're taking, and in a school, just so you know, when I go to the hospital, to work at the hospital, they won't let me wear blue jeans. Well, I think it's a stupid rule. Well, no, I understand what they're trying to do, but they won't let me as a chaplain wear blue jeans. That's their rule because they're trying to meet a certain standard. Yeah, do they have a Bible verse for that? It's a hospital. They don't have a Bible verse for that. Okay? But it's their standard, right? And so because if I want to be a chaplain, I have to meet that standard. It's the same in our school. We don't have a Bible verse for all of our standards in the school. But it's school standards, not church standards. You hearing me? But then what happened was the fundamentalists, they would take these Christian school standards, and then the pastor would stand behind the pulpit, and he would yell and holler about all the kids that aren't meeting the school standard. And then suddenly that became the church standard. And then we started criticizing people because they didn't quite meet the same standard we thought they would meet, and we spent all our time focusing on externals. The devil had us quick as a wink. I mean, it didn't take us long. Kind of reminds me of this. You know what a matador is, right? So it's like like we're the bull. Stay with me here. And the matador is the devil. And he's got this red thing, and he says, oh, look at this red thing. I'm behind this. We know the devil's behind it. We know he's behind that red thing. But then we go after it. We put our horns down, and we charge at that little red thing he's got in front of us. Well, and we know the devil's behind this. We know it's behind it, so we put our head down, we charge it, and as soon as we get our horns tangled up in that little red piece of material, he sidesteps. Right? See, because we think it's that red thing that's causing the trouble. It's the guy holding the red thing that's causing the trouble. Does that make sense? And that's what happens in our churches. So if you try to deal with that, a pendulum swings too far, and we say, well, nothing matters. Well, things do matter. The outside does matter. He said, clean the inside first, and then the outside also will be clean. Right? You want the outside clean. You're supposed to look clean. You're supposed to look right. Okay? But, so, guys like Evangelist Phil Kidd. I'm naming some names here just because I want you to be familiar with the names. I want you to at least hear them once and know what that. So Evangelist Phil Kidd is a guy in our culture, in our age. He's just retiring now. But he's traveled across the country, and he specializes in embarrassing people in his service. They have him, they call it hot preaching. On fire, full of God preaching. And he will get on somebody, call them out in the middle of a service for having their hair too. What's the matter? You want to dress like a girl? What's the matter with you? I'm talking to you. You know, he'll go off on them right in the middle of a service. And it's created this atmosphere of hatefulness, and it's turned people away. We had a guy some years ago, I won't mention his name, but he came to our church, and there was a little boy, it was a bus kid, and this actually is what the man said. This guy's preaching from the pulpit. Little boy got up to go to the bathroom, and he said, son, sit back down. I'm talking about the Word of God here. If you got to go to the bathroom, go in your pants. That's what he said. From the pulpit. Well, he never came back to my church again. In fact, you've never had him, he's never preached here. I learned my lesson. I'm very careful on who preaches here. For that reason. I don't like that kind of business. But what it was, he was, you know, and he goes and sits around at a preacher's conference, and he's like, well, I told that boy and all that. You're a big man, and you just bullied a little boy in a service. Hello? That's horrible. That kind of nonsense, I want to get clear away from. I don't want anything to do with that. So What I'm saying is, one of the things I've noticed with Jesus in the way he would reach people was he showed everyone common courtesy. No matter what station they were in, no matter what they looked like, he showed them respect. And with the sinner, he would sit down and eat with them. With the Pharisee, he would sit down and eat with them, because all of them are made in the image of God. What I'm dealing with here is something that the political climate that we've just been through, we've forgotten. Okay, let me shoot this rabbit and then we'll be done. So, Friday, Cindy Bailey stopped by the school. So they brought the big bus out, Bailey for Governor bus. And she stopped by with her entourage, and they toured the school, and it was neat. It was neat for the kids. Kids made little posters and stuff for it. It was really, really fun. Well, we also, because we had one governor candidate represented, we also sent a letter of invitation to J.B. Pritzker. Now, legally, we have to do that, right? But honestly, if J.B. Pritzker decides to swing through Mattoon and stop at our school, nobody's going to call him a fat pig. Nobody's going to call him names. He's a governor, sitting governor. Are you hearing me? What we've lost in our culture, and I'll be honest, Donald Trump's getting the blame for it. A lot of people are blaming him, but it's not him. He's not the only one. It's been people on both sides of the aisle that have gotten literally nasty. And actually, it came before Donald Trump, and it was people burning police cars in the streets and that kind of thing that really started this problem, and Donald Trump actually tried fighting back against it. But the truth is, what's happened in our culture is we've lost statesmanship. We've lost the ability to respect someone who has a different opinion of ours than ours. Do you know there's as many different opinions in here as there are people about certain issues? If I threw certain issues out here, everyone would have a different perspective on some of those things. We need to teach our children to be respectful of everyone. So, I had one teenager come up to me and say, I don't understand why you would invite Governor Pritzker. My parents hate him. Like, well, he's not going to come. But, the conversation was a great conversation. Teaching them how to respect somebody who is in authority in a position, respecting and honoring the position. I'll be honest with you, it's really hard to respect the position that Joe Biden has put us in. He's still the president. And so we have to be careful. When President Obama was the president, I saw Christians sharing memes that were filthy about him. Regardless of what you think about him, be very careful what you say. Because there's little ears hearing this. And we're creating an environment in our culture that will lead to civil war. You understand that, right? It will lead to civil war. It will lead to shooting people. Why do you think people are shooting? Why are kids shooting people in the schools? Because we're creating that environment. Well, stop for a minute. Let's pause in worship. What we have to teach respect. And I see that with Jesus Christ. Didn't matter what they looked like, didn't matter what the status they were, a respect for them. A respect for them as a person. Do you have to respect what they do? No. That's what's tough, isn't it? Learning that. And I'm going to tell you something. I don't have the answer on all that. I'm struggling with it myself. I'm having trouble respecting our president. I'm having trouble respecting the people that put him in that place because he's obviously mentally not capable of handling it. I'm really having trouble with who put him there. The party that promoted him, knowing what he was, and then they're just going to leave him out there to dry, and they're going to leave him hanging because they're embarrassed. I have problems with that. They didn't show him respect either. But that's something I think we need to work on. So going forward, how do you talk to somebody who has a different political, you realize the political viewpoints in our world are very polarizing at the moment? So as a Christian, how do you reach somebody that's on the other side of the aisle than you politically? You start by respecting everyone. Does that make sense? All right. That's it for now. God bless you.